Good evening and welcome to the September 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Burbank Infrastructure Oversight Board. May we please rise for this flag salute. Thank you. And who will be doing the roll call tonight? Okay, great.
Present.
Walter Brennan. Absent. Mario Coronado. Absent. Greg Jackson. Here. Vanessa Rachel. Not here. Tamara Takahashi.
Here.
Jeff Vanderbort.
Thank you. Next, we have announcements. Do we have any announcements tonight?
Yes, Madam Chair, board members, if I may introduce a couple of new faces that you see today. As our recording secretary, Mr. Arvind Satagayan is stepping up for us. As you know, Karina Rosales has moved on to, I don't think it's better, I'm from Public Works, but some brighter pastures for herself with BWP. And next to Arvind is our senior clerk in Public Works, Sharina Billisbach, who is kind of minding the side and plan B if we do need in the future. So thank you both for helping out.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. Do we have any other announcements? Did one of our commissioners visit the Transportation Commission this month? I think that might have been one of the absent ones.
Madam Chair, I believe Ms. Coronado was not able to attend their meeting this past month. And I remember she sent her apologies in regards to the board.
Thank you. All right, next we have public comment. Do we have any public comment tonight?
There's no public comment.
Yep, okay. Then we will move right on into the consent calendar. Approval of minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve minutes?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
before we take a vote on it, we've had some transition on who does the minutes. And this was an issue, at least for me, at the very beginning 3 years ago. And I have difficulties in the format in which these meeting minutes are constructed. They're very cursory. They don't go into any detail, and they're not what we've been getting for the past 3 years. And so I'm not going to vote in favor of it tonight. I would like to see us return to the format that we had previously.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for pointing that out. We had had that discussion a few months ago, similarly. Mr. Pember.
Madam Chair, I don't know what the value of a motion is if we need a total of 4 votes, so I guess we'll just have to table this.
Yeah.
Although, Mr. Jackson, is your concern that you want these minutes to be redone, or is it that we have a more information in the minutes that we have so far obtained?
These don't have to be redone. I don't want to impose, on staff extra work. But I would look to the future. I don't think we can take a vote tonight because our chair wasn't here. So
That's
we
right.
have
So
only
like-
3
So either
people
way, sure.
Yeah.
So
who
the
were
math
here.
doesn't work.
Right.
So the math doesn't work, as you said.
Good point.
So I guess we'll.
Okay.
Members of the board, just for clarification, generally acceptance of minutes is just a vote to say, hey, these are official minutes that we're willing to accept as minutes of the board. You don't necessarily have to have personal knowledge, it's more of a ministerial matter. So if you want to vote on it today, that's fine as well. You're just basically saying these are minutes acceptable to the board. If you do want to push it to the next meeting, that is fine as well. And just wanted to make a quick point about these minutes. The last meeting were really updates and reports, and so it's pretty difficult to summarize a detailed discussion of an updated report. And so sometimes you are going to have minutes that are going to be pretty sparse just because it just reflects that a report was given.
correct me.
Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, Madam Chair, and board members, we fully understand the conversations that have occurred in the past. This was a very specific contemplation and decision by staff to do the minutes this way. And the reason is because minutes are not transcriptions or to serve as quoting individual thoughts of commission or board members or even council members. We're looking for consistency across all committees and commissions and boards in the cities. And while we certainly appreciate the fact that there is less detail, Mr. City Attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but the purpose of the minutes is to provide an overall summary of the conversations, the topic discussed, and most importantly, document the motions and the actions of the body that is having the meeting. So my question maybe is, we can talk about this a little bit more, but I think I'd like to point out, especially for the Infrastructure Oversight Board, this is a live and recorded meeting. So if anyone wants to come back, look at the minutes, and delve into specifically what specific board members said or what discussions were, they can do that. It's a permanent record. So that's all the more reason why a summary for this specific body should be similar to all the other bodies in the city. So I appreciate your time and letting me detail that for you.
And I do concur with the director's comments and agree that minutes are really to take note of the action taken, and these would be legally adequate.
Mr. City Attorney and Mr. Director, I respectfully disagree. I mean, you've told us that the council learns of what we do at these meetings by means of the meeting minutes. And if the meeting minutes are sketchy or very incomplete to capture the full issues that were discussed at this by this board, then it really serves no functions for us to sit up here. And I've been on city commissions for 18 years and school board oversight commissions for another 8 years. And most of those meetings, most of those groups, in fact, I think all of them, had more detailed meeting minutes. I don't know, is this an action the council has taken to abbreviate the record, the public record? I mean, for the council to find out the details and go to, the video, they have every week a very thick volume of information that they have to plow through. And I think it's unreasonable to think that they will then delve into the video record of what we did or didn't say on a particular issue. So I respectfully disagree. So I guess I just will be a constant no on the issue of approving the meeting minutes.
I'll leave through the chair the one thought that perhaps the board members would like to review other boards and commissions minutes that are posted, and we could take it from there.
Sounds like a great idea. May I just mention, by the way, that I went through the process of looking for our minutes and a few of our meetings in preparation for the prior meeting because I was out of town. I didn't have my folder. I had left it at home. And there were a couple of agendas that are missing. And there was a meeting in which we were combined with celebrations for some event, and we were lost somewhere in 7 hours so someone is not necessarily keeping track of our televised Granicas summary or televised meetings. So there was an error there. And perhaps it was just a simple error, but good to know that someone looks at them. I did, and there was a little blunder there.
Sure. You can feel free to contact me with those specific dates that you saw, and we can make sure were they, I guess I could ask over this forum, were they recent or were they
It
older?
would have been the last year or two.
Oh, okay.
Because we were talking about the library, I anticipated reviewing what I was looking for, and actually, I reached out to Mr. Han, and he sent me an email. I was looking for our list of unfunded projects, and I thought, oh, we've discussed this a couple of times, so I kept looking, and then in that process, I found, again, an agenda missing, and then another one where the meeting that I thought would refer to these things, we were part of an 8-hour presentation of city events.
Yeah, we'd be happy to correct anything that you guys have found that is inconsistent or not posted.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the follow-up, the thought Mr. Jackson had a minute ago, is that while there is a legal requirement for what's on the minutes, I think that he brought up a good point of who are the minutes for? Who are going to read the minutes and who needs to know the information, right? And what my understanding is that there's two groups of folks who are going to basically read these minutes, well, maybe three. The public, the council, and then ourselves for reference, okay? So for me, just personally, I look at this, and if I were 6 months out and I went back to these minutes to check, I wouldn't know I could see what the presentation was on, but I wouldn't know what was discussed. And I just watched the video, so I can compare actually in my mind to these two. And I remember in previous minutes, some of the things that were included were just the questions that we asked and the concerns that we had as board members. And so I think that's worthy of having in there to just show council and the public and ourselves what was important for us. I mean, maybe not a full dialogue, but just like a bullet point like this is a bullet point of what our concerns were would be adequate, I think. Because the presentation material, I mean, as a community member or as a board member, yeah, that's important, yes. And I also would really want to know what was discussed, like which of these bullet points were important. So I'm just thinking of who's going to read it. And I wanted to ask Mr. Berkman, would it be appropriate to even ask council what would they like to see coming out of our notes for their packet so that they know what we talked about? Would that be appropriate to ask?
No,
Informally?
Madam Chair. They are, through the city manager, telling staff how to do the minutes. So that's why I think it's a good idea to take a look at all the other commissions and boards and see how they do them. They're not totally consistent. And I think we try to hit a middle ground where we provide summary but detail. Some are just, here's the motion and here's what they did.
Yeah.
Others, the Sustainable Burbank Commission, for example, which is not recorded, I tend to work with staff to provide a bit more detail because there's no real record of it. But you guys here, it's like council, where it's all in the public record in perpetuity. So I understand where you are coming from, and I think there would be a good middle ground that we could work with. And of course, in the end, when you review the minutes, if there's something specifically you want to have noted, you can add that into the minutes. As long as it's accurate, of course, and you guys would have to vote that it's accurate.
Okay. So we're going to I'm going to abstain from voting because I wasn't here. I did watch the video, but I just feel when I'm not attending a meeting, I don't want to vote. And then Mr. Jackson's going to vote no. So I'm going to ask the board if you would like to table this until next month approval.
We will.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and table this until
Bring it back next.
next night, yeah. Great, thank you. All right. After that exciting discussion about the minutes, we're moving on to reports to board. The exciting election of chair and vice chair. All right. So I was not here last month when that was originally scheduled to be on our agenda, and it was suggested that that be pushed to this month, but now we have it for board members. So I open up to my colleagues to discuss whether to continue with that agenda item. If we do, how so, and any thoughts?
I'm fine making a decision tonight. That's me, but I'm willing to listen to anybody's perspective if they want to do otherwise. And I'd be glad to make nominations.
Okay. Is that fine?
I would think we should table this also for the next meeting till we have more of our board members here.
Okay. So Jackson, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I would say continue it on for, to the next meeting. I have no problems with that.
Yeah. Just in case there's somebody who's not here, who maybe would like to nominate themselves, or we have a discussion for, moving on to, we don't want to voluntold somebody and then they're not here. Oh, by the way, you're the chair now.
That would be the best.
Yeah. So I think, for me, and respecting the three who are not here, to make sure that their voices are heard one way or the other, I would like to also move it to next month if we can. Is that okay?
So I believe we need a motion?
Motion?
I think because this is more of a formal event for the election, we should probably move to continue this to the next available meeting.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to continue this at the next available meeting?
I'll take a motion.
All right, Mr. Avazian?
I'll second.
All right. Take a roll call on the vote.
Sorry, now that we're live, we can have a all vote. We can say
Okay.
all in favor and
Okay.
et cetera.
Rather than one at a time? Okay, great. So, okay, great.
So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. All right. The central item for tonight, which is item G2, establishment of a $10 million reserve account for the new Burbank Central Library and Civic Center project. Who will be presenting that item tonight?
Madam Chair, I will. Thank you very much. So, Madam Chair and board members, as you know, subsequent to our August 25th meeting, where we provided an update to the IOB on the Burbank Central Library and Civic Center project, staff provided an update to council on the project on September 13th, which also included details on the proposed use of Fund 34, or Measure P, for the project. At the council meeting, staff recommended council approve funding, reserving $10 million of Measure P's current unallocated fund balance of approximately $15 million to serve as matching funds for a grant application the city submitted to acquire funding from the California State Library Building Forward Infrastructure Program. Council approved the recommended action. This grant requires the city to make a one-to-one match. Therefore, the city council's documented action of reserving the $10 million for the project makes for a stronger application in this very competitive process. Since creating a reserve account is not an actual expenditure, staff would need to return to council to get authorization to expend the funds for this purpose. Additionally, the council may choose to release funds from the reserve at any time for any purpose that falls within the approved uses of Fund 534. As part of the motion approving the action to set aside the $10 million in the reserve account, council also directed staff to bring this item back to the IOB to provide the opportunity for you to make a formal recommendation regarding use of the funds in this manner that they approved. So we're here tonight to respectfully request the IOB recommend the City Council establish the $10 million reserve account for the Burbank Central Library and Civic Center project from Fund 534. Staff will advise the City Council of the IOB's action in a memo to be provided through the City Manager's office. Library Director Elizabeth Goldman and Finance Director Jen Becker are here as well if you have any questions, and that concludes my report.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Berkman. Yes, Mr. Jackson.
Do we know when the state will be acting on the matching funds? Is that something that's coming up in the next 30 days, or is it possibly 6-8 months out?
I see our Library Director coming up to provide an answer. Thank you.
Good evening, Elizabeth Goldman, Library Services Director. We don't know. They're doing this, the grant, they are handing it out in several rounds and phases. So we could hear something very soon, or we could be deferred to a later time period. It's very hard to say.
And our application is in.
Yes.
It's been submitted.
Yes.
And one of the issues is whether there be matching funds
Ultimately, if we were awarded the grant, then there would be council acceptance of the grant, and as part of that, we would have to clearly state that we have the matching dollars. Up until we officially receive the grant, we are not required to demonstrate that, but of course, it makes a stronger case if council has taken the
Certainly.
action that they took last week.
Certainly. Okay, thank you. Why I asked that is similar to the preceding item where we decided we didn't feel that we should decide on who should be our chair and vice chair, since we have only a bare minimum attendance. I have misgivings on us making this $10 million recommendation. Also, that said, what I would like to see, and I think it's very laudable, the library is in need. It's not up to current standards by any stretch of the imagination. And 10, 12 years ago, my wife and I knocked on doors getting signatures for the Measure L to replace the library and build a new one. That said, we do have a list of unfunded needs stretching to, I think, $600 million, give or take a few dollars. And I think it behooves us to look at that list and say, is the library more important than maybe structural repair to the Olive and Magnolia bridges? I don't know if that's a health safety issue. There's a number of other big ticket items, and I think to adequately respond to the council, whether we think the 10 million set aside and then for the next 30 years, probably similar amounts, is a major commitment which we should thoroughly review. Also, I attended the commissioners' soiree several days ago. Very nice, and thank the council for that. Why I mention that is one of the council members came to me and expressed concerns over this very issue because they felt staff was putting essentially the cart in front of the horse and not getting into the oversight board to get our input to them on this issue. That all said, I strongly recommend that we hold this over to our next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jackson. Any other comments?
Can I express an opinion? And thank you, Mr. Jackson. I understand what you're saying, but I walked away from the last meeting with the sense that we were supportive of the commitment of the $10 million. In fact, I say we were extremely supported, and I know I, for one, pointed out this is, a two-generation commitment, and that this is not just the $10 million, but the additional millions of dollars that will be used in the interim until the project gets finalized, and then we have another 5.8 million or whatever it is for 30 years. So this, I said, this is a 36-year commitment because we're using money that we have been saving. The $10 million is from, we're in year 4 of our Measure P funds. So I thought we had already, as a board, come to the conclusion that this was a good thing and that basically this is a formality, and therefore waiting for the rest of the board members to speak, in my opinion, may not be as important, although I get it. I struggle with the same things. I'd like to see us doing more slurry coating right now to take care of the streets that have just been repaved and use those funds. But I think it appears that we also have a commitment here, multi-generational commitment, to use our funds for long-term infrastructure, and this definitely qualifies. So I just, I'm happy to wait, but at the same time, I'm wondering if we really are not going to gain any more benefit from that. I think that to revisit the unfunded liabilities, and there are, a multitude of them, we probably collectively can come up with half of them is more important than not important, but at the end of the day is what projects we have. What's that expression, shovel ready? This is a project that has been, as you said, you were committed to spend time with your wife 10 years ago, and we've been wanting a new library. So my sense is, I don't know, I mean, I'm happy to wait, but I thought we already agreed that this was the right thing to do as a board. And I know that we didn't take the formal vote that apparently the council needs from us, but that's why I don't necessarily feel we need to wait. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Vandenborg. Mr. Bazian?
One comment I have, can staff share us the draft of the funding agreement or the grant requirement?
Through the chair, for what purpose? It's an application that we submitted to the state.
It's, well, the requirement for the local match for the one-on-one, if we are not, and my understanding was we do not need to appropriate the funds at the moment until we have the funding agreement.
Right, through the chair, we don't have to, I would say, encumber and expend the funds with the state until the state says, hey, you have this grant, to the point of making a grant application stronger to present to the state against many, many, many other, obviously, jurisdictions who are looking for library improvement money. It's quite critical that we are able to say council has committed in this reserve account if you say yes. So that basically, in a simple way to say it, we get more points in the review.
Okay.
But it is true, it's not an actual expenditure, and that was something we were mentioning to council, and the same thing as Member Vanderboord said. We said that when we presented this $10 million action that we were going to recommend to council was in the August board report as well.
So we are not suggesting, we are not authorizing to the use of this fund, rather than suggesting the city council to reserve $10 million as a local match for a grant application.
Right. Council is seeking your approval of the action that they took last meeting to put the $10 million into a reserve account for this specific grant.
Okay.
All right, so to make sure I understand what the process is that we're going through here. So tonight, we're not being asked to approve the project. We're not being asked to approve any particular funding. We are doing this so that we have the ability to apply for grants. We are asking for a reserve to say, we have this ready so that we have a higher chance of getting a grant. And then if one of those grants comes through, yay, we have matching funds, then there's another process where us or the council somehow then approve the use of that 10 million and said, yes, we like this grant, we want to move forward, now we're going to decide to use the 10 million, right? So there's whole nother stage after the approval of the grant, right?
Yes, that's correct. And if I might invite Ms. Becker up here to generally explain how council accepts grants, and this would be a similar process.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Jennifer Becker with the Financial Services Department. You're absolutely correct. So again, this $10 million was moved into a reserve account, which isn't an appropriation. It's basically just setting aside funds so that we can, demonstrate our financial strength in order to be competitive for this grant, like we've already discussed. In order for the council to accept any kind of outside grant funds, we do require a council resolution, a formal resolution for them to accept it. If we were to be successful in receiving the grant at that time, we'd return to council, one, to get a resolution to accept the grant, and then two, to appropriate the matching funds at that time. So that, because that expense would be a requirement under the grant. So that's sort of the second step of that.
In that second step, would the IOB be involved with that as well?
We could certainly bring back that to the IOB. It's not a legal requirement, but my assumption is that the city council would want us to run that through this group first in order to approve the expense. Since you do have oversight over the entire fund, I think that would be an appropriate step.
Right. To the point of, the answer is no. Typically, CCBs, commissions, committees, boards do not approve grant acceptance of grant funds prior to council actually accepting them. But in this case, specifically to Ms. Becker's point, since council had us come back to you to even approve a reserve of this, I would think they would want us to come back to you to say, hey, let's accept this money and recommend to council to accept the money as well.
Okay. It sounds like because this project is such a large scope and essential for the city infrastructure, that they want us to be a partner in this process through the whole thing. So we could be pretty confident that as each step comes, that will be wrapped into the process. Okay, good. So what we're looking at tonight is basically the first step of a very long process, the first financial step of a very long process, which already many things have happened before that are not necessarily well, there's a little bit of financial already, but this is a step where we are recognizing that in order to allocate some of the funding from grants, we have to do this preliminary commitment to our own participation in the funding, right? Okay. And then, let's see, if and when that grant is coming up in front of council, does that get presented as a unique item, or is it part of the budgeting process?
In this case, it would be a unique item.
Okay.
So you could appropriate the funds during the budget process, but the acceptance of the grant typically requires its own resolution. That's not really a part of the budget. And of course, you know, as we move into the future years, this is a multi-year project, obviously, as part of the central library. Anything that we do going forward after the acceptance of the grant would be part of your annual budget that you would review, and we would plan it into our annual budget review that happens before we take the budget to council.
Okay. So I just watched the last meeting, so it's the milestone, right? The milestone payment, okay. So that milestone payment is a unique payment that would be with the grant, matched with the grant, and then following that would be the yearly payment back at a certain rate, year to year, okay.
Exactly, but this is all beginning in, you know, roughly 2027, so we have a
Okay.
lot of time to come back with this board and review the financial plan. It's very in the early planning stages, so this is sort of our step, 0.5 in getting to this project, getting this project off the ground.
Okay. And if I understand correctly, council's already decided to do this. This has already been an action of council, right? This is a matter of looping us into this conversation, having us take a look at it, and giving them our perspective on what's happening, right? Basically.
And Madam Chair, that's true. And if I may, this has been part of your past couple of years of capital improvement program development discussions as well. That would certainly continue. Mm-hmm. And because this is such like you said, a project of this magnitude and importance to the city, we would provide regular updates as we move along.
Okay, thank you. So I thank you for explaining all this. I watched the video a few hours ago, and so I, kind of walk through your explanation of how all the money works. And one of the questions I think that a community member might ask, and I would love to hear your answer as kind of a layperson's response, like a simple response is, so this is $10 million, where's it gonna come from? So we have like all the things we're gonna fund, right? And we have all the process we go through, and then suddenly we found $10 million to do this. So what would be the answer to say, where's that $10 million coming from?
Well, one of our goals of this project would obviously be to avoid using general fund dollars to fund a capital project such as this, because there's so many competing interests for those limited dollars that we have to provide all of the services that the city provides to the community. But of course, the beauty of the passage of Measure P is that the community directed us to take 50% of those funds and dedicate those specifically to infrastructure projects. And that's partially because of the large list of unfunded needs and capital needs that we had with the city. So we feel certainly that the Fund 534, which is our municipal infrastructure fund, is the appropriate place with which to fund a large capital project, right? Because that's really what the community told us that those dollars should be dedicated to. Now, as far as where the funds come, as we know, Measure P is made up of an annual contribution from the general fund, that maintenance of effort, plus 50% of Measure P, plus any interest that's earned on the fund. Each year we do a budget. We take whatever we project to receive in revenues, and we budget accordingly for expenses. But of course, those don't ever line up 100%, so anything that's unspent at the end of the year drops back into the fund balance, in addition to any revenues that are over what we projected. Of course, we project conservatively, because as a finance person, that's my job, is to make sure that we don't overspend our revenue. So we always leave a little bit of that buffer. Over the past couple years, we've spent less than 100% of our budget. In addition to, our revenues have overperformed our projections. Sales tax is doing phenomenally well for the city, both our traditional sales tax and our Measure P. I'll be coming back to this board next month to give our full year-end financial report for the municipal infrastructure fund, so we'll talk a little bit more about that next month. So what happens is that fund balance builds up over time. It's similar to your savings account, right? When you have excess money in your checking account, you move that over to savings, and that's sort of what we have. So we're probably in the neighborhood of around $15 million in fund balance, right? That's not including the revenue that's coming in during this current fiscal year. That's sort of revenue and expense left over from prior years. So that's where we are suggesting that we pull that $10 million from. So it will not impact the board's ability to adopt a full infrastructure plan in the coming years. So that's important to understand. It's not going to reduce the amount of dollars you have available for projects next year, unless you would choose to spend more than what your revenue brings in, and then obviously you're dipping into that fund balance, which of course competes with other things.
I'm sorry, how much did you say is the balance now?
Roughly 15 million. This is day 4 of our audit today, so we're still in the process of closing our books. So I will have a much better number to you next month when we're further along in our close process.
Okay, thank you. That was very clear. I really appreciate the explanation.
No problem, thank you.
Okay, so then, when we get to the point where let's say, be optimistic, we got the grant, yay, we're gonna match it and spend the 10 million. When do you estimate, a year or two in the future? How far ahead are we expecting to be putting that in front of council?
When are we expecting to hear about the grant or spend the money?
Spend money. Yeah.
So the grant requires the funds to be spent by the end of March 2026.
Okay.
And we're anticipating that we would be able to start construction on this project in 2025.
Okay.
So the grant funds as well as the matching funds will be identified for some early aspects, either equipment that can be purchased to be installed later, or things like the superstructure of the building and some of the early work that would be done within that time frame.
Okay, so the $10 million we're talking about tonight wouldn't even actually be in front of council and spent for at least a couple more years.
Correct. It would be in front of council as part of the grant acceptance, but the dollars wouldn't be spent until at least 2025.
Okay, and since it's coming from the reserve fund, then you have 2.5 years to keep saving and knowing that it's going to be there and set aside. Okay, that mapped it all in my brain. Thank you very much. All right, let's see. I think that's everything. Did you have a question, Mr. Randall?
Just an observation. The way that I see it is it's kind of like a relationship here. A month ago, we told the library concept that we love her, or love him, whatever you want to look at it. And now we're actually getting engaged, and I think we're buying the ring. It's costing us $10 million. We can't back out. I mean, when everything is said and done, the library program owns that ring. I don't think we are going to add any more money. It's there now, obviously in a larger quantity. And yes, we have competing interests, but I don't think we can, when this comes back to the council, and if we're lucky to get the grant, if it comes to us for the courtesy of discussing it, is fantastic. But again, I don't think we can back out, because at that point we'll be at the altar. And some people can run away, but this won't be us.
like that
I don't think so. So my sense is, this is it. That's why I thought we were doing already a month ago. That's why, Mr. Jackson's concerns to wait make me think that, yes, we can all, and maybe we should come back with this, have on the agenda an opportunity to look at the demand for these unfunded items and get them a little more ranked, so that, we express some more concern for something more urgent. Whatever the reason is, I think at this point, we can wait a month, but at the end of the day, we already told the plan we love it, and we are now getting engaged. So that's the way I look at it, and so another month isn't going to make a difference.
Yeah.
But I recognize the need to understand that there are other components that are not going to get funded, and therefore, we have to accept that. We also recognize the fact that here we are again, going to year 4, and we haven't been able to spend all the money because we don't have the personnel resources or the shovel-ready projects to do it, meaning there are a number of other reasons that allowed us to build up these $15+ million. Part of me says, we should be spending it all, but the other part of me says, oh, gee, now we really have an opportunity to spend for something worthwhile.
Yeah.
Either we backed into it, or just is the reality of how it's been managed to have the opportunity to have more funds. That's my thought is, for me, this should move forward. I'll tell you, I won't be here the next month's meeting, so that's why I wanted to express my opinion
Yeah.
as clearly as possible. Even if it isn't on the minutes, if somebody decides to watch, they'll know that I
Right.
definitely understand how painful it is to make a decision like this when there are so many other demands, but how important it is to make it, and I personally feel it's worthwhile.
Thank you for sharing that. Follow-up question for your comment. So is there going to be any delay or obstruction to your process if we were to move this item again to next month with the other folks to be here, or other than maybe bringing you back one more month to join us?
I can answer that, or you can. Well, have your answer if you differ from mine. But, Madam Chair, the action has been taken by council.
Yeah.
So we have the additional competitiveness in our grant application right now. And the urgency would be if we happen to actually hear within the next 30 days, hey, you got the grant, and council says, well, did IOB approve our action? Then we have to say, well, not yet, but we think next meeting, it sounded like they will. So it would be great to take the action now, just in case, if there's a miracle and we get that letter saying, congrats, commit your money.
Got it. Yes, Mr. Jackson.
Okay. I'll not address again the issue of continuing this, but I have a question on the funding. In the report that Ms. Goldman, you prepared for Mr. Hess, and that was before the council last week, talks about the $34 million milestone payment, which is obligated by the city under this process as we move forward. We'll have set aside 10 million now. So are we envisioning next year to set aside another 10 million, and the year after that, another 10 million, to make it close to the 34 million?
Well, the goal is to use a combination of different funds to get to that $34 million number. We're very much hoping 10 of that 34 million will come from a grant that is not our money, which would be lovely, of course, right? And that's the plan. Of course, we'll seek out every other source of grant funding in addition to the library grant as well. But the intention is to use a combination of money. So to the extent we could use money that's reserved for special purposes like art in public places, development impact fees, transportation funds, all of the different sources that we could use that could be applicable to this project, parks and open space, anything like that, will be pooled together to get to that $34 million milestone payment. So it's possible that we would ask for additional money from the Municipal Infrastructure Fund. Right now, we didn't want to put aside any more money than what we needed to match the grant. But certainly in the future, yeah, we would look to potentially tap more of the Fund 534 dollars. But we'd have a much clearer picture of what we would need as we get closer to the project.
Okay.
And if I can just add to that, we've, as we talked about last month, we've worked very hard to respect all of the huge list of unfunded infrastructure needs and balance it. So that's one reason why we are looking at other available funds. For instance, the library has some development impact fees that have been collected for this very purpose and not spent. That's not going to cover 34 million. We get a tiny fraction of development impact fees, but those are restricted for exactly this type of use. So this is a good thing to use them on. And I've been having some very active conversations recently about other grants and funding sources that we might be able to go after now that the project is starting to take shape. Up until this point, it's been it's been vague enough and didn't have the council backing from the action they took last week, that would, again, make us competitive in even having some of these conversations with potential funders, whether it's government agencies, foundations, or other sources. And now we can really aggressively start looking at sources to take down that 34 million, minimize the impact on city funds for that 34 million milestone payment.
Okay. I'm a little confused about Prop P, or Fund 534. When we reviewed the proposed and now adopted capital improvement projects for this new fiscal year, which I guess we're now in, I think there was 17 projects, and I seem to remember 17 million being a number that was thrown out as what had been accumulated in the Measure P fund. Now, I don't remember what the price tag of those 17 projects, but was it 7 million, and hence we have 10 million in our pocket to transfer over for this library project? Or did we really have more money than what we were told about back several months ago?
So I don't have the budget in front of me, but if I remember correctly, we projected revenues for the current fiscal year, that's dollars incoming, of around 18 million, and we appropriated around between 17 and 18 million dollars in projects, combined projects and maintenance for the municipal infrastructure fund.
Okay, that sort of goes with my, weak memory. So this $10 million that we're now shifting into this holding account,
Right. This is not
that's
from
prior years?
Correct.
Others, okay. all right.
remaining fund balance from prior years.
Okay, all right.
So what we try to do each year with the budget is not appropriate more dollars than we have coming in revenue. But like I said, at times, we spend less than what we're budgeted, or we receive more in revenues than what we're budgeted. And when that happens over time, we build up a fund balance. And that's where we get that 15 million. So you're sort of starting with cash, and you add your revenues, and then you take away your expenses, and that's sort of how you get to the amount of dollars you have left in your fund.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. As for the issue of taking action tonight or not, I mean, I agree with you, Mr. Vandenberg, that, I think we all were holding hands, and if not singing Kumbaya, we were in general agreement last month that this was a very worthy project. I don't know about buying a ring or what, but, the train is moving out of the station. And I just don't know if the other unfunded projects, I mean, there was one dealing with storm drains or something that was over $100 million price tag for water quality. Or there are these other projects, and we've not really gotten any input from staff, whether they are more important, I hate to say that, than a new library. And I guess that's for another day's discussion, but in order to, fulfill what I think my obligation is, I have difficulty doing it in the absence of that analysis.
I have a procedure question. With the four of us here, if we were to take action, all four of us would have to agree on it, right? Because that would still be,
4
not
out of
the ma-
7, correct?
Yeah, okay.
Majority. And if I may, more for public consumption of who's watching, Mr. Vice Chair, the good action that this board took over the last fiscal year, when we went through our capital improvement program development process, you might recall there was a specific meeting to go over all the unfunded needs and actually prioritize them in a level of 1, 2, or 3. So we have made that step. And I think that's the right step to make because, like you said, there are some very major projects. This was a list, I understand, before I got here that was developed as far as what Measure P could fund. And what Measure P could fund, amongst other funds, is what this body does with staff every year for several months. And a large project that requires action right now, we're very fortunate to have that before you, and it's not going to be the last one. You know, we're working on developing a 20-year facilities capital improvement program for all of our other, 1 million square feet of building space that we have. So it's a continual prioritization process. It starts in January, or I think earlier. We're trying to get earlier this year, with Mr. Hahn going before the departments and saying, what would you like to work on? And they look at the unfunded needs list, and they look at what they have in their plate now and what they forecast in the future. And they have to digest that and come up with the best priorities and projects that they, through us, can present to you. So there's always that opportunity, and there's always that thought of, I don't know what's in the future, but right now, this action to take for this project is definitely something that we, like you mentioned, saw support from you last month, and council sees it too. So hopefully we can continue on that and continue on the process of developing the best capital program we can each year with the funds that we have available.
Mr. Berkman, I just wanted to make one quick clarification. I did a quick look at the municipal code on establishing the IOB. I did not see a supermajority or majority of the existing membership requirement for voting on a recommendation. All I see is a quorum requirement. And so I think unless we have some bylaws otherwise, and especially since it's a recommendation, as long as it's a majority of the quorum with the existing members here, you could agree on a recommendation to council.
Okay. Mr. Avazian, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Berkman. What I'm thinking, just approval of the IOB recommending to establish this reserve for $10 million shouldn't consider IOB's approval of spending that $10 million on the library project without us looking at prioritization of other CIPs. I personally don't want to, if I'm approving this, do we have to make a motion, Mr.?
Yes.
Okay, so approval of this motion, I don't want to consider like, okay, it's approval of a little piece of the puzzle that you are approving the entire picture of the puzzle. The way that it was presented to us, this is a reserve money that we are approving to put it in a bank account to go and seek for the grant funds. When the grant fund comes back, that's where the IOB and mainly the city council's responsibility is to approve spending of that $10 million. With that said, I don't see a problem if this is the terms of this motion to go ahead and approve so the staff can go and seek for the grant, or if there is any supplemental information that they need to provide.
Yep.
That's all I think. I'm sorry, I have a couple of questions about this. This $10 million reserve that's sitting in an account, will this be earning interest during the time?
Yes, absolutely. All of our available funds, the city's cash is pooled into one giant fund, and the interest is then apportioned to the different funds based on their available cash balance.
Okay, and the minimum and maximum of the local match for this grant was a 1-to-1, or is there anything that we can contribute more or less for the grant application?
It's 1-to-1. It's because the state is looking at it based on a community poverty measure. And there's a local income per capita measure. They look at how much our community funds our library per resident versus other communities. So based on Burbank actually being a well-funded, we're kind of in the middle of the pack, but we fit into the well-funded group around the state. We're required to do a 1-to-1 match. Some other communities, for instance, Kern County, the most poorly funded library system in the state, is, I believe, only required to do a 50% match. So, but for us, it is required 1-to-1.
Understand. Thank you. One more comment I have, which is not related to funding or where we're going to get the money for this project, is I'm sure this is a big project. This is going to have a big impact to the city of Burbank, to our residents. We are adding 500 plus units, residential units in the dense area of the city. Maybe we need to do a little bit more outreach to our residents, to our constituents, to see what are the takes. I'm up for one for the library. I'm one of the often users of the library on the Olive right here. But at least we need to hear what people are asking. What do they want? Because this is the two sides of a big scale. We are adding a dense residential area and the trade-off of a good library, if this is what people want or not. I'm for the library. But again, what are other people's needs? What are the other Burbank residents' suggestions on this project?
Sure. And with regard to this project specifically, there will be some public input opportunities this fall that are described in the City Council report from last week. And there's also the downtown Burbank specific plan is underway. There's public opportunities related to that. That's looking at the Civic Center plus a larger area of the downtown. And the Community Development Department is also updating what's called the housing element of the general plan. And so that's coming to City Council next week, in fact. But through that process, the community has also had opportunities to express their feelings about things like location and density of housing throughout the community. So there's ongoing opportunities for that to be contributed, and there will be some specifically related to this project in the next few months.
Thank you. No more question.
Great, thank you. Yes, Mr. Jackson.
I don't want to be perceived as an obstructionist. So I agree with what Armin said, and I will support if there's a motion out this evening to suggest the council do what they've already done and set aside the $10 million.
Yes, I'm also in a position to make the recommendation. Yeah, but before we do that, since you're not going to come back next month, I have a couple more questions for you to ask about this project. Just things I wanted to ask last month when I wasn't here and I saw the video. So this particular thing that we're looking at, the funding for the 10 million and the matching and all that, that's just for the building that has the library in it, right? It's not for the entire Civic Center project? There's three buildings in the Civic Center project, right? 4?
There's one building that's the library plus replacement office space for the administrative services building, and then there's public parking and open space. So those are infrastructure but not buildings. And then the rest is the private residential development.
Okay.
The grant is from the California State Library, so it is very specifically for the library. The milestone payment would be for all of the public assets, the whole capital expenses from the city's side.
Okay. And do the other properties that are not involved with this, do they have a public part too, or is it just private development for those other properties?
The other properties where the current library is and the city hall parking lot area are just residential and a small, tiny amount of commercial on the first floor.
Okay, so the city won't have a responsibility in that development, or are we selling the land, or?
We are not selling land.
Leasing
We're
the
Leasing it, okay.
Yeah, so
Okay,
the
great.
ground rent from the leases is an important part of making this project financially feasible and not using all of Fund 534.
Yeah. So it's my roundabout way of asking if we're going to have an infrastructure funding conversation about those two properties too, or if it's just focused on this one, okay. And then, let's see. I'm just curious if your projections, since we're talking about the new library and building it and long-term plans, in your projections, do you see the new library, how it's going to be situated in the mixed-use building, and it's going to be updated, that its its income to expense ratio will be better once the new library is in place compared to the one that exists now? Are we going to have more or less financial responsibility for that library once it stabilizes? I guess that's my question.
Are
From the
you
city perspective.
Are you asking that in terms of the capital and maintenance expenses or the operating expenses?
I guess both. I mean, operating's not our purview, but I'm just curious about
Sure.
like the whole, will we be responsible for financing more of that part of our city budget because of the new building, or it'll be pretty equal?
Oh, sure.
Overall.
Do you want to? Okay.
Certainly. I mean, so the library is going to replace the existing central library and the administrative services building, and also the parking behind City Hall. Those three items alone the utilities and maintenance of these sort of outdated buildings are fairly costly. So our hope is that even with the larger footprint or the larger square footage of the new facility, we'd probably at worst break even, because obviously we'd look for, more sustainable buildings than what we currently have. And at least, from my perspective, the office space from ASB probably a little bit smaller, a little bit more open, and just overall, we're not going to have sort of the maintenance problems that we have in our existing facilities, which is, I'm sure Ms. Goldman can agree, both of our buildings are pretty outdated and difficult to maintain at best.
Great, thank you.
As
That answers my question.
Okay.
Oh, did you have something else? Sorry. And then, let's see, there was one more thing. Oh, where is it? Read my handwriting. Oh, yes. So before, Mr. Jackson mentioned Measure L, and I'm just curious, whatever happened to all of that funding? And just, the short answer of, is it still, did it get lost in the?
Well, we never actually took any money from anyone. We just passed a ballot measure saying we could. Measure L was 2003, and it was passed by over 2/3 of the voters in Burbank. The way the ballot measure was written, it was contingent on receiving some matching funds that we were not successful for, and therefore we couldn't actually assess those funds from our public. So they're not sitting in an account anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Great. That's all my questions. Thank you. All right, so would we like to take an action tonight on this item? Anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Vandenberg?
Madam Chair, if I may, I'd like to make a motion that our board recommend the City Council establish a $10 million reserved account for the new Burbank Central Library and Civic Center project from the Fund 534 current balance to be used as matching funds for this grant that is being sought.
Second?
I'll say.
Mr. Pazian? All right, can we take the vote, please?
All in motion, say aye.
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 All opposed, say aye. Say nay. None.
All right. Thank you for answering all of our questions for 2 months. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all the work that you've done on this project and continue to do. All right. Next up is introduction of additional agenda items. We've got quite a bit coming up in the next few months. Do we have anything else folks are interested in covering? Oh, Mr. Jackson, yes.
Madam Chair, it's not really an additional item, but I don't know where else I can speak on it. Before our meeting, I asked our city attorney about changes in the Brown Act, and we had been provided this helpful booklet a couple meetings back. But subsequent to receiving this, I read in the LA Times about some changes in the Brown Act for conducting the meetings. If there's some difficulties with anyway, in conducting the meeting. And the city attorney told me that it's not in this pamphlet that we received, and I asked if he could send that new language procedurally on how to deal with meetings. And he said he would, he'd send it to all of us, but he asked that I mention this as part of our discussion. So I just think it would behoove us to get that additional information.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Jackson. Yes, that new rule is SB 1100, and it addresses how you could deal with unruly people at a meeting. It basically memorializes what most city attorneys already recommend, councils and boards. But I'll go ahead and send that bill to Mr. Han, and Mr. Han could go ahead and forward it to the rest of the board.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll deal better than the airlines are dealing with unruly people.
All right, any other agenda items? Okay, so our pending agenda items are in October. Looks like we have a full schedule. We've got fiscal year 2021 Municipal Infrastructure Fund financial report, the Police and Fire Headquarters flooring project update, which will be interesting to see, and rescheduling of November and December meetings. Yeah, we could do that in October. I was thinking maybe we can do that now, but we don't have everybody here. So that's when we merge the two together, right, into one meeting, because we adjust it.
Right, due to the fourth Thursdays falling in and around the holidays.
Right, okay. And then our November/December meeting is the Metro North Hollywood to Pasadena Bus Rapid Transit Project update and our first and second quarter reports. And then, I guess in the future, hold a workshop to discuss and further define the role of the IOB, which is an ongoing conversation. All right, is there anything else? Well, then, with that, do we have to make a motion to adjourn, or do I just adjourn?
I believe as the chair, you can adjourn.
And then I'm choosing to adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all for being here tonight. Wonderful conversation.